In the dead of a December night, 1940, Europe was shrouded in darkness and despair. The skies above London were about to explode into flames, and below, millions slept, unaware of the coming storm. At a secret airbase in occupied France, a young German pilot strapped into his bomber, preparing to carry out an order thousands would follow without question. His name was Kurt Weber, just 22 years old, but the weight of the coming mission sat heavily on his heart. The command came down cold and clear. Destroy London. Leave nothing standing. Maps were spread across long tables, red circles marking schools, homes, and community centers. Not factories, not military targets. Kurt's eyes lingered on the blotches of red. Underneath that red was life, families, children going to bed unaware. He knew this mission wasn't just about winning a war. It was about breaking a spirit. Orders were orders, his comrades reminded him. But something inside Kurt refused to let him forget that war was more than orders and obedience. As the engines roared alive and the formation took to the sky, Kurt's mind was miles away, haunted by a voice from his childhood, his father's words echoing through time. There is honor in battle, but none in killing the innocent. The bomber flew over the English countryside beneath a blanket of stars. The quiet below was a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. "Bomb doors ready," crackled the radio. Kurt faced a choice no soldier should ever have to make. His hand hovered over the trigger, the mechanism that could unleash destruction unlike any other. As he peered down through his binoculars, he saw not faceless enemies, but children playing in a schoolyard, laughing, swinging, living. His finger froze. The order was urgent, unwavering. His fellow pilots were already dropping their deadly cargo, turning villages into firestorms. But Kurt took a deep breath and made a silent vow. He would not be the instrument of such devastation. Instead, he reported an engine failure, a lie born of defiance. He turned his bomber away from London's unsuspecting streets, letting the bombs fall harmlessly in empty fields. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The night air was thick with tension as Kurt Weber's bomber, now a lone figure in the vast, dark sky, slowly made its way back to base. The adrenaline of the moment was subsiding, replaced by a profound silence within him. Every muscle in his body felt heavy, yet his mind was sharp, acutely alert to the choices that had just been made. While his comrades celebrated their successful mission from afar, Kurt knew that his actions had deigned to question the very foundation of war itself. It was not just about defying orders. It was about defying a system that had blurred the line between right and wrong, civilization and chaos. He was painfully aware that in the eyes of his superiors, he was now a traitor, a man who thought he could play God from the cockpit. In the cockpit's dim glow, Kurt's eyes fell on the faint outline of London far below, its clouds thick and ominous. To most, it was just enemy territory, an obstacle to be eliminated. But to him, those streets represented lives, lives that depended on a choice he had made tonight. Deep inside, Kurt felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. His heart pounding, he knew this act was a ripple in an already tumultuous chain of events that would define not only his fate, but perhaps the future of conscientious objectors in war. As he navigated through the night sky, images flooded his mind. A child's laughter, a mother's lullaby, the innocent faces of those unarmed and unaware. He whispered to himself, "This is not what war was meant to be." But doubts crept in. Would anyone understand? Would his own comrades see him as a coward, a traitor? Would his conscience be forever scarred by the blood he refused to shed? He glanced at the clock. The radio crackled weakly, monotonous reports of damage, casualties, and victory. He clung to one thought. It was not victory if it came at the cost of his humanity. Back at base, the repercussions awaited. He knew that his refusal risked demotion, disgrace, or worse, court-martial. Yet he felt a strange calmness, as if in that moment he'd broken free from the chains of blind obedience. A war, he mused softly, where children sleep in peace, isn't worth sacrificing our soul for. With cautious resolve, Kurt engaged the aircraft's radio, preparing to relay his report. But before he could speak, a silence settled, thick and heavy, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Because in that silence, Kurt Weber's truth was already speaking loudest. A silent act of rebellion, a moral stand against endless destruction, echoing through history as a testament. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do in war is just to refuse to obey. The morning light crept over the horizon as Kurt Weber's bomber landed quietly back at base. His hands trembled, not from fatigue but the weight of what had just transpired. He was no longer just a pilot returning from a mission. He was a man who had defied an empire's orders. Inside the barracks, celebrations echoed. Victory was proclaimed loudly, with beer bottles clinking, shouted cheers, and wartime songs filling the air. But Kurt's footsteps were lone and measured, heading to a solitude that felt heavier than the night sky. His comrades regarded him with suspicion. Whispers followed like shadows. He missed the target, a coward hiding behind excuses. Rumors that might as well have been bullets, piercing through the thick tension. The officers called an urgent meeting. Kurt sat at the edge of a stark table, faces stern and unforgiving. "I want to know why," ordered the commander. "You lied about your mission." Kurt answered with the truth that burned deep inside him, a truth no military tribunal wanted to hear. "I saw civilians, children. They were not targets. I refused to be a weapon of their destruction." His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. In a world shaped by orders and absolute obedience, such rebellion was a dangerous spark. Days turned into weeks, and Kurt found himself under intense surveillance. His freedom, his rank, even his life hanging by a thread. But he stood firm. His conscience was no longer a whisper but a roar. Despite the pressure, word quietly spread among sympathetic soldiers. Talk of a lone pilot who dared to question the morality of war. Some called him brave. Others called him a fool. Behind closed doors, Kurt wrestled with doubt. Would history remember him as a hero or a traitor? Did his act truly matter in the vast machinery of war? One restless night, his thoughts were interrupted by a letter. From an Englishman who had heard the story, a pilot shot down behind enemy lines. The letter spoke of shared grief and a hope for peace. Letters like these revealed that even enemies could understand the humanity buried beneath uniforms. In the stillness of the night, Kurt understood the power of an individual's choice. To turn from destruction, to choose compassion over cruelty. The war raged on, but his heart found a silent resolve that no shell or bomb could shake. The shadows of doubt lingered, but in the light of conscience, Kurt Weber remained unbroken. The days that followed were a battle unlike any other Kurt Weber had ever fought. The war outside raged on with relentless fury. Shells exploding across the continent, cities reduced to rubble, and lives forever altered. But inside the walls of his barracks, Kurt wrestled with a different kind of warfare, one of mind, soul, and survival against an unforgiving system. He was summoned frequently. Interrogations, debriefs, hushed meetings with stern officers whose cold eyes showed no mercy. Each question was sharp, each gaze a blade. "You disobeyed direct orders. Do you understand what that means?" The underlying threat hung in the air: court-martial, imprisonment, even execution. Yet Kurt spoke with unwavering honesty. "I obey orders because they are just, but when an order demands killing the innocent, I can no longer say yes." The officers branded his words as dangerous defiance. To them, the war was a game of numbers and strategy, a chessboard on which pawns were sacrificed without question. But Kurt was no pawn. His conscience had become his compass in the chaos. Isolation soon followed. Comrades who once nodded in greeting now averted their eyes. He was left alone with his thoughts, a solitary figure amid the storm of conflict. Outside, the bombs still fell, painting skies with fire and sorrow. Yet inside, Kurt's resolve only deepened. He found solace in small acts, writing letters to his family, reading worn books about heroes who chose humanity over hatred. And then came the unexpected. An officer, Lieutenant Bauer, approached him quietly. "Not all share the same heart," Bauer said softly. "But your courage hasn't gone unnoticed." This quiet acknowledgement was a beacon in the dark, a reminder that even in war, humanity flickers. But time was running out. The higher command demanded compliance. The war machine had no room for rebels. Kurt knew his days in the Luftwaffe were numbered. And though fear gripped him, he was prepared to face whatever came next. Because some battles are fought not with guns, but with conviction. As night fell over the war-torn landscape once more, Kurt Weber looked to the stars, seeking a sign, a reason to keep fighting. Not the war, but the hope that one day peace would prevail. In the quiet of that night sky, he made a vow: to remain a guardian of humanity, a silent defiance against the cruelty that war demanded. For in the end, it is not the bombs that decide history, but the choices of those who dare to say no. The weeks slipped into months, but Kurt Weber's internal battle intensified. Every day, he faced the heavy silence of defiance amid the deafening roar of war. His actions, small as they seemed in the vast machinery of military might, echoed loudly in his conscience. He was no longer just a pilot obeying orders. He was a symbol of resistance within the enemy ranks. Rumors swirled around the base. Some whispered he would be court-martialed. Others believed he would be executed for treason. Yet Kurt held his ground. Deep inside, he believed his resistance was necessary, not just for himself, but for the morality of warfare itself. One evening, during a heated debrief with his officers, the room felt like a courtroom's silent stare. "Your actions put every crew member at risk," accused the chief officer sharply. "You disobeyed a direct order. Do you understand what that means?" Kurt's reply was steady, calm yet resolute. "I understand perfectly, but I cannot be part of an act that kills innocent people." The room fell quiet. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, as if every word weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, the officer's expression softened, a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. "Your morality is admirable," he said quietly, "but war is not about morals. It's about victory." Kurt looked down, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. He knew what his standing was, fragile and precarious. Yet, he also knew what he stood for, that part of him that still believed in humanity amid the chaos. That night, as he gazed through the cockpit's window, the moon cast a silvery glow over the deserted airfield. He thought about the families in London, families he might have helped destroy. He wondered if someday history would remember his act as a mistake, or as a small beacon of hope amid darkness. Inside him, a new resolve was forming. He would not let his fear govern him. He would be a voice of conscience, a quiet revolution of one. Some soldiers had already made their choice, marching blindly to obey or rebel openly. But Kurt Weber was forging his own path, one moral step at a time. He whispered softly, to no one and everyone, "Every choice matters, even the smallest act of kindness in war." And with that thought, he prepared himself for whatever judgment the future would bring, knowing that even in the storm of war, the human spirit could still find a way to shine. The days that followed Kurt Weber's silent rebellion weighed heavily on him. His mind was a battlefield, torn between duty and morality, obedience and conscience. Every morning he awoke to the same question: had he truly done the right thing, or just escaped punishment? Within the stark confines of the airbase, whispers circulated like ghostly echoes. Some soldiers regarded him as a hero, a man who dared to act human in inhumane circumstances. Others saw him as a traitor, a man who betrayed the brotherhood of war. Kurt was no stranger to the judgment that followed acts of defiance. He knew that sooner or later, higher orders would catch up with him. And yet, each day he clung to what little hope remained, that his small act of moral courage might ripple outward beyond the confines of his aircraft. Late one evening, in the quiet of his quarters, Kurt sat at a battered desk, pen trembling in his hand. He was drafting a letter he would never send, yet one that expressed everything he felt. "To whom it may concern," he began softly, "I have flown many missions, but tonight I made a choice that no soldier should have to make. I refuse to kill the innocent. I pray that someday the world will understand the courage it takes to simply stand for humanity in the face of overwhelming brutality." As he wrote, memories flooded back, unbidden and raw. He remembered a small girl in London, clutching her mother's hand, looking up at the sky as a bomber roared overhead, unaware that her entire world was about to change. He saw her face, a mix of fear and innocence, in his mind's eye. Those images haunted him. Every child's face, every mother's silent plea, echoed in the chambers of his heart. He whispered to himself, "I can't erase what I saw. I can't forget what I felt." In the distant corridors of power, an alarm was already sounding. Rumors of his disobedience had reached the ears of officers and generals. They convened in hushed, commanding voices, debating his fate, whether he was a hero or a liability. But Kurt was no stranger to the consequences of choosing morality over blind obedience. He had prepared for what might come: resignation, disgrace, or even death. Yet within his resolve he found an unbreakable truth. Real bravery isn't just in fighting enemies, but in resisting evil. That night, as he stared at the starry sky, he thought about the stories he once heard. Stories of soldiers who refused to kill, who fought against tyranny from within. He realized that just like them, he was fighting a battle larger than himself, a battle to preserve his soul in a war designed to crush it. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered, "Whatever comes, I am still human." And deep inside, he understood that even in the shadow of war, light persists, no matter how faint. Because sometimes, the greatest act of resistance is to refuse to become what the world expects you to be. And in that refusal, Kurt Weber became a silent hero, a testament that morality can withstand even the darkest storms of war. The walls of the military tribunal were cold and unyielding, much like the faces that surrounded Kurt Weber. Each officer's gaze was sharp, their questions piercing, ready to unravel the very fabric of his defiance. Kurt sat alone, the weight of his choices heavier than the uniform he wore. He was no longer simply a Luftwaffe pilot, he was on trial for his humanity. The prosecutor's voice was harsh as he laid out the charges. disobedience, insubordination, treason. "They call for your removal," he declared. "For refusing to fulfill your duty, you have endangered the lives of your comrades and betrayed your country." Kurt's response was calm yet resolute. "I followed a higher duty, the duty to protect innocent lives. To kill children is not an act of patriotism, it is an atrocity." The courtroom whispered, unsettled by his conviction. In a time when obedience was law, Kurt's words were a dangerous dissent. But as the trial progressed, testimonies emerged. Voices of pilots who had questions of their own, officers who saw the weariness in Kurt's eyes, and civilians who had witnessed the horrors of indiscriminate bombing. While the tribunal debated, Kurt remained steadfast, knowing this trial was not just his fate, but a test of conscience for all soldiers bound by orders. The verdict was looming. Would the military crush the man who dared to stand for morality, or would history remember him as more than just a footnote in war? In the silence before judgment, Kurt whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the world that he hoped might one day embrace mercy amid conflict. As the gavel struck, sealing his fate, one thing was clear. No matter the outcome, Kurt Weber's legacy was already written in the hearts of those who believe in humanity over hatred. The verdict was delivered with a cold finality. Kurt Weber was stripped of his rank and dishonorably discharged from the Luftwaffe. His name was erased from official records, as if his act of conscience had never occurred. But the man remained unbroken. He walked away from the military not as a defeated soldier, but as a witness to the enduring power of personal conviction. Kurt's exile from the ranks was not the end, but the beginning of a quieter, yet no less profound battle. He sought refuge far from the battlefields, a small village where the scars of war were etched deep into every face and street. There, among the echoes of atrocities and whispered prayers, Kurt found a new mission: teaching the next generation about the value of life, the power of kindness, and the importance of standing up for what is right. In the company of children playing in the fields, he shared stories, not of battles won or lost, but of courage found in the face of impossible choices. "I once carried orders to destroy," he would say quietly, "but I chose to preserve." These words, soft yet striking, became a beacon of hope in a world battered by hate. Years passed, and the war's legacy endured in scars and memories. But Kurt's story, once silenced, began to awaken in the hearts of those who seek peace. He became a symbol not of rebellion, but of humanity, not of defiance, but of conscience. When the world finally learned of the pilot who refused to drop bombs on children, many marveled at the strength it took to say no. His legacy echoed far beyond the skies he once flew, reminding us all that within the chaos of war, the true victory lies in preserving the soul. And so, the story of Kurt Weber remains, a solemn testament to the power of mercy and a challenge to those who follow, to weigh the cost of their actions and to remember, always, the humanity in war. Decades have passed since Kurt Weber's act of silent rebellion, yet his story remains shrouded in quiet reverence among those who value courage and conscience. In the broad corridors of history, his name is hardly spoken, often erased as an uncomfortable reminder that morality can be a battlefield even amid the chaos of war. But the quiet heroism he embodied, that simple act of saying no, has echoed across generations, inspiring countless others to challenge injustice in their own worlds. In a small village nestled away from the site of the world's turmoil, Kurt's memory lives on. There, his ashes are buried beneath a humble stone engraved with a single phrase: "To the man who refused to kill the innocent." Local elders tell stories of a man who, although branded a traitor, was actually a hero to the conscience of humanity. Children grow up hearing that it takes more courage to stand alone than to follow the crowd. And behind every book on war's horror, a chapter quietly whispers about those who dared to defy it, like Kurt Weber. In the years that followed, historians and peace activists looked to Kurt's story as a beacon. They saw in his defiance a reminder that morality must stand tall, even in the face of mass destruction. His decision, made in a moment of chaos, became a symbol of hope and resilience. In museums, his story is told alongside the horrors of war, as a testament that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit can rise above. Some museums display a single frame, a bomber crossing the night sky, with a quiet inscription, "Refused to destroy innocence." On a global scale, his story has helped shape debates on morality in warfare. Military leaders, ethicists, and civilians alike speak of the importance of moral courage, inspired by the silent act of a young pilot who refused to be an instrument of genocide. In countless classrooms, students learn not only about the strategic failures and victories of war, but also about the moral victories, the stories of individuals who chose compassion over compliance. Kurt Weber's act, once considered a dereliction, now stands as a cornerstone for human principles that transcend war's brutality. And in quiet, unseen corners of the world, his spirit endures, calling on each of us to remember that true victory is not only in winning a war, but in maintaining one's humanity through it. Because history, in its undeniable truth, belongs not just to armies and empires, but to individuals, and their courage to say no when the world demands otherwise. Time moved on, as it always does. The world rebuilt itself from ashes, and the thunder of war faded into memory. But some stories, quiet, almost forgotten, refused to vanish. They lingered, not in textbooks or monuments, but in the hearts of those who still believed that one man's choice could change the future. Kurt Weber's story became that kind of echo, whispered first, then carried softly by those who found hope in his defiance. He was never celebrated with medals or parades. There were no songs written in his name, no statues carved in his likeness. But his name began to emerge among historians and moral philosophers as an emblem of something all too rare in war: conscience. Years after his death, a young journalist, researching forgotten World War II stories, found fragments of his diary tucked away in a dusty archive. The pages were yellowed, the writing uneven, but the words were powerful. They called me a coward. Maybe I was. But if cowardice means refusing to kill the innocent, then I pray the world never runs out of cowards. The discovery spread quietly at first, then stirred curiosity among those hungry for real humanity behind war's propaganda. Soon, students began writing theses about him. Documentarians sought out his village, tracing his footsteps through empty fields and old hangars where his plane once stood. And in those places, a strange calm lingered, as if the earth itself remembered the night he chose to disobey. In one of the most poignant moments of his rediscovery, an old British woman attended a memorial where Kurt's story was retold. She rose to speak, her voice trembling but resolute. "When I was little, our home was spared one night when the bombs didn't fall, though they did everywhere else. For 80 years I never knew why. Now I do." Her words silenced the crowd. It was as if history had exhaled, relieved that justice, even delayed, had finally found its witness. Kurt Weber's act, once erased from records, had become immortal in impact. Because valor doesn't always roar from the battlefield, it sometimes whispers through time, reminding us that conscience can be as powerful as courage. As the years turned, filmmakers built quiet tributes, historians retold his defiance, painters captured his solitude above the burning city. His story crossed borders, translated into dozens of languages, inspiring those caught between obedience and morality. Each version carried one lesson. The war may change, uniforms may fade, but the struggle between what is right and what is commanded will never end. And if ever there comes another dark hour where men are ordered to forget compassion, somewhere, someone will remember the name Kurt Weber and the night he refused. Perhaps that is how history heals, not with the pride of victory, but with the memory of mercy. A single man, a silent act, and an echo that never fades.